There is a story buried inside one of the most beloved shows in television history, and almost nobody knows the full truth of it. You think you know the Munsters. You probably grew up watching reruns, or maybe your parents told you about it, or maybe you just recognize that big goofy Frankenstein guy and his vampire family living in that creaky old house on Mockingbird Lane. But what you probably do not know is that there was a version of this show that was never supposed to exist, and another version that almost aired in its place that would have changed everything about what became a classic. This is the incredible story of how close America came to never meeting the family at 1313 Mockingbird Lane at all. And once you hear what really happened behind the scenes, you are never going to look at that creaky old house the same way again. Let us go all the way back to the real beginning, because it is not where most people think it is. The idea of a Munster family living a completely normal suburban life had been floating around Hollywood since the mid-1940s. An animator at Universal Studios named Bob Clampett first came up with the concept as an animated series that he thought would be perfect for television. But nothing happened. The idea just sat there for nearly 2 full decades, untouched and forgotten, while the rest of Hollywood moved on to other projects. Then in 1963, 2 writers named Alan Burns and Chris Hayward picked the concept back up while they were working on Rocky and Bullwinkle. Think about that for a second. The same creative minds behind a flying squirrel and a moose making Cold War jokes were now trying to make Frankenstein funny for primetime television. What they understood, which became the entire secret of the show, was that the joke was never about the monster being scary. The joke was about the monster having absolutely no idea that he was scary at all. That single brilliant idea was the foundation everything else was built on. The producers chosen to actually make the show happen were Joe Connolly and Bob Mosher, and their other famous project tells you everything about what kind of show this was always going to be. Connolly and Mosher created Leave It to Beaver, that perfectly wholesome, apple pie American family show that taught generations of kids about growing up. By handing the Munster family to the men who built that family-friendly template, Universal was making a quiet promise before a single frame was shot. This was not going to be horror wearing a comedy hat. This was going to be a family show, completely and totally, that just happened to have a Frankenstein and a vampire as the parents. That creative DNA shaped every single decision that followed and made sure the show would always be about the family, not the monsters. But here is the part almost nobody talks about, and this is where it gets genuinely wild and shocking. The show you know, that iconic black and white world with the creaking doors and gothic atmosphere, was not the first version of what these characters were supposed to be. Not even close. In early 1964, a pilot was filmed for CBS and it was shot in full color. Full color. Hold on to that because it is going to come back in a way that feels almost cruel later. The show, now famous for its perfectly eerie black and white world, started its life being pitched to network executives on a color reel. And the cast in that first pilot was almost entirely different from what everyone remembers today. The people on screen were not the ones who would become famous for these roles. Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis were locked in early, back in February 1964. They had just come off Car 54. Where Are You Together, and the chemistry between them was already natural and easy, like they had been working together their whole lives. Casting Fred Gwynne as Herman made perfect sense. He was a Harvard-educated actor with a towering frame, a high forehead, and a long jaw that seemed almost purpose-built for a Frankenstein costume. Al Lewis brought a mischievous theatrical energy to everything he did, the kind of performer who could make picking up a coffee cup feel like he was plotting something wonderful. Those two were never going to change, and everyone knew they were the right choices for Herman and Grandpa. But the woman playing Herman's wife was a completely different actress. And the character was not even called Lily. She was called Phoebe, a name that would never stick in anyone's memory the way Lily did. The actress playing Phoebe was Joan Marshall, and her portrayal had a very serious problem that nobody saw coming. When network executives looked at how she was styled, what they saw staring back at them was Morticia Addams. Here is why that was a crisis that could have ended the whole project. At the exact same time CBS was developing the Munsters, ABC was developing the Addams Family. 2 networks, 2 Munster family shows, premiering the same year. And now both wives looked like they could be the same person. That was not just awkward. That was bad enough to shut everything down completely and force everyone to start over from scratch. Joan Marshall was out. The character was redesigned from the ground up. And the search for a replacement led to one of the most quietly heartbreaking backstories in all of classic Hollywood. The actress who stepped into the role and made it her own forever was Yvonne De Carlo. And she did not take the job because of ambition or career strategy. She took it because her husband, a stuntman named Bob Morgan, had been severely injured during the filming of How the West Was Won. The union refused to pay his medical bills. Their savings were running out fast. Yvonne De Carlo needed work, and she needed it urgently, desperately. She accepted the role that would define the rest of her public life out of pure financial necessity. She did not know she was auditioning for something that would make her famous. She only knew her family needed money. And she was extraordinary in it. Every warm moment, every funny line, every instance of quiet grace that Lily Munster ever showed on screen came from a woman who showed up to that set because she had nowhere else to turn. That knowledge makes every scene she is in carry a little more weight when you know the real story. The boy playing Eddie in the original pilot was also replaced because the network felt things were not quite right. His name was Nate Derman, and the network felt his performance came across as too aggressive, too genuinely threatening. There's a real irony in that situation. On a show specifically about a family of monsters, the child was considered too monstrous. They needed Eddie to feel like someone's actual kid, just a boy who happened to have a widow's peak and occasionally howled at the moon. Butch Patrick got the role and brought exactly that quality, something warm and recognizable underneath all the monster trappings. He understood that Eddie was not a monster. Eddie was just a normal kid who happened to live in a monster family, and that was the whole point. After all of that recasting and retooling and starting over, 4 separate pilot episodes were filmed before CBS was finally satisfied. 4 different versions of essentially the same family before anyone was willing to say yes and commit to making the full series. 4 separate attempts to get it right. During that process, the decision was made to shoot the show in black and white instead of color. Part of that was budget. CBS and Universal did not want to spend extra money on color production for a still unproven show that might never work. But part of it was also intentional, a way of connecting visually to Universal's classic monster films from the 1930s that had inspired the characters. What nobody anticipated was how perfectly it would work. The shadows, the textures, the slightly off and eerie quality of 1313 Mockingbird Lane. All of it came from a decision made partly to save money and partly for artistic reasons. Some of the best creative choices in entertainment history are accidents born out of budget meetings and practical concerns. And even after 4 pilots, there was still one more obstacle standing in the way. The CBS network chairman himself, William S. Paley, screened the show in August 1964 and immediately called his head of programming to have it pulled from the schedule. He thought it was unwatchable and wanted it gone completely. His programming chief told him it was too late to replace it and find something else. So Paley said fix it and get it on the air anyway. A few weeks later, after the show premiered and became a massive hit, Paley turned around and warmly congratulated his programming chief on the smart editing job he had done on that earlier rough version. He was looking at the exact same show. He had simply forgotten he was the one who called it unwatchable. The man who nearly killed the Munsters before it ever aired ended up complimenting himself for saving it. You could not write that if you tried. Now, before audiences ever saw a single episode, the people making this show were doing something extraordinary every morning just to get it on screen. Fred Gwynne arrived on set at 5:30 in the morning, before the sun came up, and sat in the makeup chair for 3 full hours every single day without fail. The Herman Munster costume involved 40 to 50 pounds of padding, 5-inch platform boots, and a full-face makeup application that took forever. And here is a detail that sounds impossible until you understand the craft behind it. His face was painted bright violet every morning. Bright purple. Because the show filmed in black and white, the makeup team had calculated exactly which color under studio lighting would translate on film to the specific gray-green Munster skin tone that looked so right for a creature assembled from different parts. Every time you watch Herman Munster, and his complexion looks perfectly eerie and greenish, what you are actually seeing is a man covered in bright purple paint sitting under hot studio lights. Between takes, a stagehand would blast cold air up Gwynne's costume sleeves with an air compressor just to keep him cool enough that the makeup would not melt before the next scene. He suffered through that every single day. Al Lewis had his own daily indignities that nobody talks about. His Dracula nose was a carefully crafted prosthetic applied every morning with great care by skilled makeup artists. It was quietly eliminated after just a few episodes of the first season. The reason had nothing to do with creative decisions or script changes. Lewis kept accidentally dunking the prosthetic nose into his coffee cup between takes. Count Dracula of Transylvania, repeatedly soaking his elaborate nose in his morning coffee like it was just another detail of his day. That one small and completely undignified detail somehow captures exactly what this show was underneath all the Gothic mythology: talented, dedicated people doing an absolutely ridiculous job with complete professional commitment every single day. They treated the work seriously even when the situations were funny. And what did all of that effort actually produce? Something remarkable and lasting. In its first season, 1964 to 1965, the Munsters finished number 18 in the national Nielsen ratings, tied with Gilligan's Island. A show its own network chairman had tried to cancel weeks before it aired landed firmly inside the top 20 programs in America. That was incredible success. The theme music was nominated for a Grammy Award in 1965. A sitcom theme, nominated for a Grammy. That never happened. The show received a Golden Globe nomination for Best Television Series. The critics were paying attention. The audiences were showing up. By any measure you care to use, the Munsters was a genuine triumph. Everyone involved knew they had something special on their hands. But then came the second season. And then came Batman. In January 1966, ABC launched Batman, a campy superhero series that aired twice a week like nothing had ever done before. Wednesday's episode always ended on a cliffhanger, Robin trapped in something dangerous, the villain laughing as he escaped. Thursday's episode was the resolution. And Thursday night was the exact same night the Munsters aired on CBS. Every week across America, millions of viewers faced a choice: find out whether Robin survived, or check in on Herman Munster at the funeral parlor. They chose Batman. The Munsters dropped from number 18 all the way down to number 61 in the national ratings that second season. Batman was sitting at number 5. That gap was not just discouraging. It was impossible to close. The show that had been a phenomenon was suddenly struggling. People inside the production tried to find a way out of the ratings disaster. Someone seriously proposed giving Eddie a pet ape named Koga to generate fresh interest. In isolation, that sounds ridiculous, but adding a novelty element was a completely standard rescue move in 1960s television. Networks did that all the time. It did not matter because nobody wanted to fix the show with gimmicks. Because there was another problem sitting on top of the ratings disaster, and this one had no creative solution at all. By 1966, the entire American broadcast industry was switching permanently to color. Every major network show was going color that fall. And the Munsters had been built specifically for black and white. Those gothic shadows, those deep textures, the entire visual language that made 1313, Mockingbird Lane feel like somewhere genuinely strange and wonderful, all of it had been designed around black and white cinematography. Converting the sets to color would have required an expensive full reconstruction, and neither CBS nor Universal was willing to spend that money on a show already losing viewers by the millions. They had to make a choice. Fred Gwynne and Al Lewis were physically and creatively exhausted. The daily makeup process had taken a real toll on Gwynne especially, and both men had grown frustrated with the second season scripts. The writers had started reaching for bigger, louder, more exaggerated storylines, and in doing so had quietly walked away from the thing that made audiences love the show in the first place. The Munsters worked because underneath all the monsters and the cobwebs, it felt like a real family in real situations. A family that wanted, more than anything, to belong somewhere. A family that simply could not understand why the world around them could not see past how they looked. When the writers abandoned that truth in favor of spectacle, the audience felt it even if they could not name it exactly. The Munsters was cancelled by CBS in May 1966. 70 episodes. 2 seasons. And then the lights went out on the show and on the family at 1313 Mockingbird Lane. Everyone thought that was the end. The show was done. The Munsters was history. Except the lights did not stay out. The show found syndication. And through syndication it found something it never quite had during its original run: permanence and a second life. Reruns circulated through local television markets for decades. Children who had no memory of 1964 grew up watching Herman and Lily and Grandpa and Eddie and Marilyn and fell in love with them just as completely as their parents had. It aired on Nick at Night and then TV Land, introducing new generations who claimed the show as entirely their own. Rob Zombie spent nearly 20 years working to bring the family to the big screen because the show had mocked him so deeply as a kid. That is not nostalgia. That is something that goes much further down into a person's heart. The reason the Munsters lasted so far beyond what its ratings ever predicted is the same reason it worked in the first place. The comedy and the heart were never two separate things. You could not pull apart the humor of Herman Munster terrifying every neighbor he ever had from the absolute sincerity of Herman Munster as a father who only wanted his family to be happy. The monster costume was never really the point. The point was always the family inside it. A family that looked different, that the neighborhood was afraid of, that just wanted to live peacefully in a community that could not see past their appearance. In 1964, the same year the Civil Rights Act was signed into law, that was not just a monster story. It was something far more honest and far more human than that. It was about acceptance and understanding and family. The Munsters was an idea that nearly died before it was born. It was rebuilt from scratch across 4 pilots because the network kept changing its mind. Its own network chairman tried to kill it before it ever aired because he thought it was unwatchable. It was knocked off the schedule by a superhero show that did not itself survive much longer. Despite all of that adversity, it became one of the most genuinely loved television families the medium has ever produced. 70 episodes, 2 seasons, and a permanent place in the hearts of people who were not even alive when it first aired. That is not a small thing. That is not just nostalgia or casual memories. For a show that almost never existed, for a family that came so close to never meeting America, that is absolutely everything. The Munsters proved that sometimes the things that are worth having are the things that are hardest to make, and that real family love can exist in the most unexpected places.